We often test others to reveal their truth. But sometimes we discover our own. When a wealthy man decided to test the loyalty of his poor housemaid by leaving his safe wide open, he expected betrayal. But what she did not only shocked him, it changed him. This is a story about trust, greed, and the surprising beauty of a pure heart. His mansion, nestled in the hills outside the city, was equipped with more surveillance than a small airport. Cameras were hidden in every corner, and motion sensors tracked even the slightest movement. The staff, though small and well paid, was carefully vetted and monitored. He began to scrutinize the people who entered his home. The cook, George, was too clumsy. The gardener, Luca, was often seen on his phone. But it was Maria, the maid, who lingered in his thoughts. She was always quiet, punctual, never made eye contact unless spoken to, and never took a day off. She cleaned with precision, moved like a shadow, and never spoke about her personal life unless directly asked. It wasn't that she did anything wrong. If anything, she was the most efficient member of the staff, but that very perfection made Arthur suspicious. Maria had been working at the estate for over 3 years. She was in her early 40s, with streaks of grey starting to form at her temples. She rarely smiled, but she never frowned either. Her work was consistent, and she had never once been caught using her phone on duty or slacking off. Arthur had never heard a single complaint about her, which in his experience was almost unnatural. He began to watch her more closely on the security monitors. One morning, Arthur woke up with an idea. It was dangerous, irrational, even. But it gripped him like a fever. He would leave his personal vault open, not just unlocked, but visibly open, like bait, and see who would take it. If someone on his staff had been waiting for the right moment, this would be the perfect test. The vault was no ordinary safe. It was built into the wall of his private study, protected by biometric locks and a manual code. And inside it were high-value items, rare watches, heirloom jewelry, stacks of cash, and a folder with important financial documents, the kind of treasure that could ruin a man if it was stolen. Arthur instructed his estate manager to arrange for the staff's usual rotation, but ensured Maria would be alone in the east wing where the study was located. He cleared the rest of the day for her to deep clean that section, something she did once a month. That afternoon, as Maria arrived on schedule and entered through the side door in her pressed uniform, Arthur sat in his hidden office, with multiple monitors flickering in front of him. One camera was pointed directly at the open safe. The door was ajar, revealing the glint of gold, the crisp edges of stacked bills, and the smooth, dark leather of the folder. He had made sure it looked obvious, but not staged, the kind of mistake a rich man could make when too distracted or too trusting. He told no one of the plan, not the security team, not his lawyer, not even his assistant. Only he would know, and only he would watch. Minutes ticked by. Maria moved through the hallway with her usual grace, holding a bucket of supplies and a duster in one hand. She dusted picture frames, cleaned windowsills, vacuumed rugs, every action precise, no movement wasted. Arthur's eyes remained fixed on the screen. He watched as she finally approached the double doors of the study. She paused to knock, as she always did before entering a private space. She waited, then slowly opened the doors and stepped inside. Arthur leaned closer to the monitor, narrowing his eye. Maria began her routine. She dusted the bookshelf first, then the windows. She passed near the safe without noticing it, but then, as she turned, she froze. Her gaze landed on the open vault. There was no mistaking what it was. Her head tilted slightly. She took a step closer. Arthur's heart beat faster. Maria set down her cloth and approached the safe, her steps cautious. She stood in front of it for a few seconds, not touching, just looking. Her face revealed surprise, confusion, perhaps a flicker of concern, but not greed. Not yet. She looked over her shoulder, then back at the safe. She took out a small notebook from her pocket and jotted something down. Arthur squinted. She hadn't taken anything, but she hadn't left either. She stood in place for several moments more, then turned and walked toward the desk across the room. She opened a drawer, pulled out a note card and pen, and began writing something. After signing it, She folded the note and left it neatly on the desk. She returned to the safe, gave it one final glance, then turned her back to it completely. Arthur couldn't believe it. His hand hovered over the camera controls, ready to rewind the footage. He had just witnessed something rare, but his mind was at war with itself. Was this a delay tactic? Would she return? Was she waiting for the room to clear? He didn't know yet, but the moment had left him silent. Arthur stared at the monitor, eyes narrowed, barely blinking. The image of Maria walking away from the open safe and calmly continuing her cleaning routine unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. He was prepared for many outcomes: denial, panic, theft. But not this, not the sheer absence of wrongdoing. She hadn't even tried to close the safe or alert someone immediately. She had written a note. That act alone clawed at his paranoia even more. What had she written? Why not just say something? Why didn't she come looking for him or call the head of staff? His thoughts churned restlessly as he replayed the footage again and again. Maria's body language was composed, but it wasn't indifferent. She had clearly noticed the safe, paused, processed it, and made a decision. She'd written something down and walked away. That moment began to haunt him. He waited for her to leave the East Wing, then stepped out of his hidden office and quietly made his way to the study. The folded note was still there, placed neatly on his mahogany desk. It was written on the estate's monogrammed stationery, the same kind used for official messages between staff and management. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, with just a single sentence that read, "Mr. Langston, your safe was found open at 3:45 p.m. I have not touched anything, Maria." He read it twice, then a third time, each reading pulling a thread through the tapestry of assumptions he'd stitched together about her. No emotion, no commentary, no unnecessary words, just a professional observation, simple and clean. The note wasn't written by someone who was trying to prove their innocence. It was written by someone who assumed honesty was expected, normal, and natural. He folded the note again and slipped it into his jacket pocket. For a moment, he stood still in the study, surrounded by silent shelves, expensive furniture, and the open vault that had suddenly become the quietest judge of character. He closed the safe, punched in the code, and placed his palm against the biometric scanner. The metallic click of the locking mechanism echoed louder than usual. As the door sealed shut, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: shame. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind kept revisiting every moment Maria had worked in his house, her quiet steps in the hallways, the way she never interrupted, never asked for anything, always stayed late if the schedule demanded. She never once complained. She'd cleaned up broken glass without alerting anyone, handled guests with quiet dignity, and once even helped calm Arthur's elderly mother when she'd become confused during a visit. He remembered that day vividly. His mother, in her early stages of dementia, had panicked while wandering the hall. Maria had spoken to her gently, offering her water and soft reassurances, then stayed by her side until help arrived. No one had asked her to do it. She just did, and Arthur had never said thank you. The next morning, he called his assistant and asked her to arrange a brief meeting with Maria after her shift. He kept the request vague, only saying it was regarding yesterday's note. At precisely 5:10 p.m., Maria knocked once on the door of his private lounge and entered, standing just inside the threshold, with her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't look nervous, only quiet, ready, prepared. Arthur didn't look up immediately. He stared at the fireplace, unlit and cold, before finally turning toward her. He held the folded note in his hand. She waited, saying nothing. "I read this," he said after a pause, holding up the paper. She nodded once.
"Yes, sir?"
"I found the safe open and thought it best to inform you directly." "You didn't touch it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, sir." "You didn't even look inside?" His voice sounded rough, uncertain. "I saw it was open. I saw what was inside, but I didn't move any closer. I didn't think it was my place." Arthur looked at her for a long moment. He realized then that Maria wasn't the type to defend herself with long-winded explanations. She told the truth, and left it at that, like a surgeon who stitches a wound and walks away without expecting applause. "Maria," he said, finally, "do you know why the safe was open?" She hesitated. "No, sir." He nodded slowly. "I left it open. On purpose." She blinked, confusion flickering in her expression for the first time. Her eyes didn't shift with suspicion or betrayal, but with curiosity, as though she couldn't quite understand the game he had played. "Why, sir?" Arthur's hand clenched slightly, the note still in his fingers. The way she said it, without bitterness or sarcasm, was perhaps the most disarming part of all. He had expected guilt, even confrontation. He'd prepared for it, but she'd brought none of that into the room.
"I want to apologize," he said. "What I did was wrong. I let my past cloud my judgment. I thought I was being smart, protecting myself, but I realize now how it must feel to be treated like a suspect. After years of loyalty."
Maria gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "You don't need to apologize, sir. You did what you felt you had to do." "I do need to," he interrupted. "Because I wasn't testing your honesty. I was hiding from my own fear of trusting people, and you didn't deserve that." She said nothing, letting his words settle in the air. He realized how strange it was that this woman who barely spoke, never asked for attention, never stood out, had somehow become the one person in his life whose integrity could shake him. Arthur reached into his pocket and unfolded the note once more, smoothing it gently on the table between them. "I've kept this. I don't think I'll throw it away." Maria looked at it for a moment, then back at him. Her expression was calm, respectful, but unreadable. He realized then that it didn't matter if she ever forgave him or saw him differently. What mattered was that she had already shown who she was, and nothing he could say would change that. The days following their conversation passed, with a strange quietness in Arthur's mansion. The air felt different, not heavier, not lighter, but somehow quieter. Maria continued her work with the same calm professionalism as always. She arrived on time, performed her tasks with precision, and kept her presence as subtle as a whisper. But Arthur saw her differently now. Where once he saw a servant, he now saw a woman with strength he had failed to recognize, and that change in perception altered everything. He began noticing the little things: how she folded the towels in the guest bathroom into perfect shapes, how she adjusted the dining chairs by half an inch to ensure alignment, how she paused at the foot of the grand staircase to pick up a stray petal from a flower arrangement. These weren't acts of obligation. They were acts of care, the kind that came from someone who respected her environment, no matter whose name was on the deed. It occurred to Arthur how rare that kind of character was. He had met CEOs who couldn't manage basic decency and socialites who couldn't be bothered to thank a valet. Yet here was Maria, invisible to most, carrying herself with a quiet dignity that needed no applause. Arthur began adjusting his routines. He would take his coffee in the lounge, where she dusted the bookshelves, just to exchange a word or two. At first their conversations were short, polite acknowledgements, brief comments about the weather or the blooming jasmine near the courtyard. But over time, he started asking more about her background, her family, her thoughts on the city, the traffic, even the quality of the estate's water pressure. And Maria, initially reserved, began to open in small measured portions, like someone stepping cautiously into sunlight after years in the dark. He learned that she was the only daughter of a seamstress and a school janitor. She had studied accounting in college, but couldn't finish her degree due to medical expenses after her father fell ill. She had taken on housekeeping jobs to support her family, and never complained, because, as she said once with a soft shrug, "Work is still work if it's honest." That line echoed in Arthur's mind for days. She told him she lived in a modest apartment with her mother and brother, and though money was always tight, they never went to bed ungrateful. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen much, but chose not to wear the pain like armor. She was not naive, nor was she hardened. She existed somewhere in between, a space where empathy and realism coexisted in rare balance. Arthur found himself looking forward to her presence, not for any selfish pleasure, but because it reminded him of something he had long lost: the ability to trust quietly. His own story was far different. Born into wealth, raised in boarding schools, surrounded by people who wanted a piece of his inheritance or his influence. After being betrayed by a former business partner and cheated on by someone he once loved, Arthur had grown skeptical of kindness. He saw generosity as a currency. People spent only when they needed something. So, when Maria didn't touch his safe, when she didn't ask for anything in return for her honesty, it rattled something deep within him. She had passed a test she never knew she was taking, and that made the outcome all the more humbling. One late afternoon, while she polished the silverware in the dining hall, Arthur entered carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one near her without saying much, and sat across from her at the long, polished table. Maria glanced up, slightly surprised, but smiled, and accepted the cup with a quiet, "Thank you." They sipped in silence for a moment, the clinking of the spoon against porcelain, the only sound in the room. Arthur leaned forward, his hands cupped around his tea. "Have you ever thought of doing something else?" he asked suddenly. "Something beyond housekeeping?" Maria looked at him, her eyes calm but alert. "Of course. I wanted to be a certified accountant. Maybe work in a firm or open my own consultancy, but that feels far away now." "What if it wasn't?" he asked, voice soft. She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked down at her tea, then back up at him. "I'd have to think about it," she said honestly. "Of course," Arthur replied, nodding. "Take all the time you need. It's not a transaction. It's a door. One that's open if you choose to walk through it." She smiled, gently. Not a wide grin. Not a grateful burst of emotion. Just a small, acknowledging smile that said she heard him. She understood. She wasn't yet saying yes, but she wasn't closing the door either. And in that moment, Arthur realized that perhaps the lesson wasn't just about trust or judgment. Perhaps it was about learning how to give without ownership, and how to receive without obligation. That subtle grace between giving and taking, that he understood now, was the soul of decency. The following week moved slower than usual in the grand mansion. Arthur found himself waking earlier each day, waiting for the soft jingle of Maria's keys in the front door, the careful steps of her polished shoes on the marble floor, the quiet rhythm of her daily routine. Ever since their last conversation over tea, his mind had been caught between hope and hesitation. He hadn't pushed her. He didn't ask again. He didn't want to turn generosity into pressure. But he hoped she would say yes, not for him, but because he had come to believe she truly deserved the chance to grow beyond the quiet borders of servitude. Maria arrived as always, neat, graceful, focused. Her work never slipped, not even a little. There was no sign of conflict or distraction in her behavior. But there was something gentler in the way she responded to Arthur now. Her expressions had softened, her voice carried more ease, and her smiles came slightly quicker. He noticed that when she passed by the open lounge, she no longer avoided eye contact. When he made small talk, she didn't keep her answers short. A subtle trust was forming, carefully and without need for declarations. On Thursday morning, Arthur stood in his study, watching the rain trace patterns across the window pane. He had just finished a call with his lawyer about transferring funds to a scholarship program, when Maria appeared at the doorway, holding a small envelope. She didn't speak, only handed it to him. He took it without a word. When he looked up, she was already walking back down the hall. Inside the envelope was a letter, handwritten in careful cursive. Arthur sat at his desk and unfolded the page. "I've thought about what you said," the letter began, "and I want you to know that it meant more to me than I can express. Not because of the opportunity, but because of what it represents. I've spent most of my adult life believing that people like me didn't get second chances, that no one would ever offer without expecting something in return. You showed me otherwise. I will accept your offer, under one condition, that when I'm able, I will pay it forward to someone else. That this act of kindness won't stop with me. If that's agreeable, then I accept." Arthur leaned back in his chair and stared at the words again and again. There was a lump in his throat. He didn't bother to hide. He didn't even realize the letter had brought tears to his eyes until one of them landed on the paper. It wasn't the gratitude in her words that moved him. It was the self-respect behind them. She wasn't accepting a gift. She was stepping into a new life with her dignity intact, making a promise not to break the chain of compassion. It humbled him. He folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. That afternoon he met with his financial advisor to create an educational fund in Maria's name. Not only would it pay for her remaining classes and certification, but it would also be available to future workers within his company who wanted to pursue better education. He didn't announce it publicly. No press releases, no headlines. It was a quiet change, just like the one Maria had sparked in him. As the months passed, things began to shift. Maria began attending night classes twice a week. Arthur adjusted her work schedule to allow study time without reducing her pay. He also had a new laptop delivered to her home, along with a note that read, "Tools are not luxuries, they're necessities for those who are building." She thanked him the next day, not with words but by leaving a freshly baked loaf of banana bread in the kitchen, with a card that said, "For the tools that restore more than function." One evening, Arthur invited a few close friends over for dinner. These were old acquaintances, executives, investors, and two long-time family lawyers. As the group sat in the lavish dining room, sipping wine and discussing politics and market trends, one of the guests asked Arthur how he managed to keep such a spotless estate without a full staff. Arthur smiled and gestured toward the kitchen where Maria was organizing the dishes after serving the meal. "You see that woman?" he said. "She's not just my housekeeper. She's a future accountant, a scholar, and one of the most trustworthy human beings I've ever met." The room fell silent for a moment. Then awkward chuckles followed. One guest muttered something about overpraising help, but Arthur's eyes remained steady. He wasn't joking, and whether they understood or not no longer mattered. A few weeks later, Maria passed her certification exams with distinction. She told Arthur the news with that same calm dignity, though her smile was brighter than he'd ever seen it. He congratulated her, and later that evening, he sat alone in the study and thought back to the safe, that foolish, childish trap he had set for her. The open door, the piles of cash, the cold suspicion. He remembered how convinced he had been that everyone had a price, that trust was a luxury, only fools believed it. And now here he was, watching that very belief unravel thread by thread, replaced by something warmer, wiser. He eventually had the safe removed, not because he feared theft, but because it reminded him of who he used to be. The new Arthur didn't need to test people to know their worth. He had learned that the human spirit, when treated with fairness and trust, often revealed its finest qualities without coercion. Maria's last day as a housekeeper came quietly. She didn't announce her departure with fanfare. She cleaned the house, folded the towels, watered the plants, and left a note on the kitchen table. It read, "Thank you for the chance. Thank you for believing in me, even if it came later than expected. This home gave me more than a paycheck. It gave me a story I'll carry forever." Arthur kept that note beside the first one she had written. Two letters, side by side, from a woman the world might have overlooked if not for a simple decision to leave a safe door open.